Hello and welcome to Community Voting Day monitoring, reporting and measuring impact workshop. This is a recording specifically for those going through the 2026 Royal Borough of Greenwich Community Voting Day funding programme, and I'm going to be walking you through the aspects of supporting you to monitor your project effectively. My name's Gail Wallace, and in a moment I'm going to share my screen with you. But initially, a little bit of background about me. I've been delivering Community Voting Day programs for a number of years across the country, based on the principle of participatory budgeting, which in essence is a process of delivering funding and resources through the community to be decided upon by the community. And I've project managed a number of community voting days across the country with great success and seen some wonderful projects. And I'm here again in Greenwich, providing that programme and providing the training to help you as a potential project applicant develop your project and also ensure that it's successful. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen so that you can see the notes that accompany this workshop, and hopefully it will help you develop your specific project. So without further ado, let's get on to the slides so that I can work through that with you, starting now. Initially, I just need to let you know the conditions for use of this video. It's specifically around this program, and no rights or privileges are given without prior consent. I won't go through the boring detail with you, suffice to say you can read it up on the screen. Let's begin. So monitoring and reporting and demonstrating impact is important for a number of reasons. The funding for this programme is public funding, and there needs to be accountability as to how that project, that funding has been spent, and what the key outcomes are and what impact this intervention has had. So how do you know you've made an impact? You might have a fantastic project with lots of great ideas, and it's a really fun, lively and entertaining project for anyone who takes part, but how do you know it's had the positive impact that you intended? Whether that impact is for physical activity, improvements in physical activity, or better diet, nutrition, and incorporation, or improvements in mental health and well-being. How do you know that your particular project has had an impact? Well, the first thing is it's in 3 stages. The first stage is the baseline, and the baseline is the point at which you first meet the people who are taking part in your project, and you get a measure of where they are. So, for example, if your project is a physical activity project, you need to know what level of physical activity people take part in currently before they start your programme. And that's your baseline. Do they go for regular walks? Do they cycle? Do they walk the children to school? Do they do any online programs? Do they go to a gym? What's their level of activity? Now, this is not a question you're asking to put people on the spot, make them feel uncomfortable, or any of those things. You're really just getting a measure of where they currently are before they engage in your program. It's a way of you testing out whether what you have done in your project is making a difference, has changed habits, has improved physical health. You might ask questions around, how long do they walk for? Do they get out of breath if they walk for any length of time? Do they notice any aches or pains from walking? Anything like that. So that's a baseline. So if you apply that principle to anything you're doing, if it's mental health, how do they feel? Do they feel low, depressed, anxious, isolated, unconnected? If it's to do with healthy eating, how much fruit and vegetables do they eat? How often do they have takeaways or processed foods? All those sorts of things. But the most important thing is to reassure people it's not a test and it's not a pass or fail. It's just to find out where they're at this point. Then there's the middle section, and that is where you kind of test out if you're noticing any changes, if they're reporting to you any changes, that they walked for 15 minutes, for example, without getting out of breath, where they would normally only walk for 5 minutes, or they've started a regular routine of walking around the park once or twice, a couple of times a week. Any discernible measurements you can take to show that as part and parcel of taking part in your project, they are making some changes that improve their health and well-being. And then the last part is the end part, and that's kind of like on a sliding scale to see from the start of your project to the end of the project, what's the difference that's made a difference? How much healthier are they? They might report things anecdotally to you, like their clothes fit a little bit better. They were getting tight at the beginning of the project and they've noticed that they may have lost a few inches, or they're more comfortable in their clothes. You might find that they're talking to you about meeting up regularly with friends and going for a walk. You might find that they've made some life changes, like no meat Mondays, where they only eat plant-based produce on a Monday, whereas normally they would have had meat in some way, shape or form in their diet 7 days a week. A whole range of things. They might have made good social connections, feel more optimistic, less anxious, less stressed. All of those elements are a really good measure of the impact that your project may have had, and it's really important at this point to think about the things you might measure in your everyday life to show that you're succeeding at something. Like if you're have committed to more reading, are you reading more books on a weekly basis? Have you learned, I don't know, a new language? Do you feel more confident in that language now that you could get by on a holiday? Or it could be as simple as you've made a commitment to make some dietary changes, and you've measured that, and you notice that you are eating much more healthily. You're enjoying that process, and so on. I don't want to oversimplify it, but it isn't. It shouldn't be something that you find hard to do in terms of your measurement, and it certainly shouldn't be something that the people taking part in your projects find hard to tell you about or to complete a survey about. So in terms of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, there's a few factors that they're measuring. They want to know if, as part of taking part in any of the programs that are funded through this program, they've raised the awareness of people in Greenwich about improving their access to local support and services. So, what's their general knowledge about health services available to them? Are they aware of what they can tap into? Where do they find that information? Is it on notice boards? Is it word of mouth by friends? Is it through the local council or the website? This is getting an idea that if people have any form of health concern or health issue, that they've got not only the right information, but they have a sense of ease about accessing that information to produce the health outcomes that they're looking for. One of the key questions that the Royal Borough of Greenwich would like to know is the demographics of people who are taking part. And I'll explain a little bit as to why this is important. It's not about monitoring all behaviours, but it's actually about seeing that services are being provided that are accessible to all of the community, that people are included, and it's also about identifying where there are gaps and where possibly there could be improvements made in certain sectors of the community accessing health and wellbeing activities and improving their longevity and general health. So the types of questions this pertains to are these: contacting, collecting basic contact information such as telephone numbers and email addresses, postcodes to give an indication of where people are coming from to take part in the activities, the gender of those people. Is your project particularly attracting men or particularly attracting women? Just the style and type of project lends itself to a particular type of person or sex of person, a particular age group. Measuring ethnicity, what ethnic background people are coming to your project from. Now, this is not to say that these measurements are about saying, well, if you get more men than women, then you should be targeting more women, or if you're getting more people from a certain ethnic background or age group, you should be changing that. It's really getting a measure of where people are at and what is popular. It might be that your project is particularly popular with a particular culture, a particular age, or a particular gender, and the Royal Borough of Greenwich might want to replicate your success in other parts of the borough to attract that demographic of people. Now, below on this slide, you can see under ethnicity, suggested minimum levels of detail. You've got categories of white, mixed or multiple ethnic groups, Asian, Asian British, Black British, Caribbean or African, or other ethnic group that is otherwise not described. So you might just want to have a tick box so that people can complete this section of data themselves with relative ease. The real important part of this process is GDPR. With all of this data, it's really important to let people know the purpose of for why you're gathering this information. You're not gathering personal details like bank accounts or all those sorts of things, but you do need to let them know that this information will be shared with the Royal Borough of Greenwich just for the purposes of seeing what the spread and the share of take up in activities is, for them to see how well certain projects are doing, where there may be gaps, and how as a public health department they might be able to fill those gaps or improve their outcomes in certain areas. So please, 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 at the start of this, let people know that this information will be passed on to the Royal Borough of Greenwich, not for the purposes of marketing, but maybe for the purposes of promoting your activity to a wider range of groups or to more groups, more similar groups. But that information will not be disclosed in a way that identifies individuals. It will be, a percentage of people from a certain age group, percentage of people from ethnic background, percentage of people from certain postcodes that took part in your project, and not individually identifying anyone to the public. Another aspect of the information that the Royal Borough of Greenwich would like to know is about the social and community connections. So part of the criteria of health and well-being is about social connection, sense of connectedness, social isolation. So here are some suggested ways of measuring that. With all of these, it's not that you have to do it in this way, it's just helpful suggestions that may support you developing your own tailor-made questionnaire for participants. So it's measuring whether people feel really isolated, up in the scale to feeling much more socially connected, and asking people to kind of just tick one of those boxes. Now, some of the language you might not be as comfortable with, might seem a little more complicated, more what's the word? Lacking in plain English. What I recommend is that you simplify this language to suit the audience that you're working with. One of the measures is physical activity, and here is an example of those over the age of 18 who are taking part in physical activity. And you can see that this is initially baseline information in the past 7 days. How many days did you do moderate exercise? Or how long did you do it for? Or how many days did you go do vigorous exercise? Now you can use this as both a baseline, a starting point of asking that information, but you can also then use it as a middle and end point, because you might find that they start out by saying, well, don't do any physical moderate exercise whatsoever at the start of your project, and then when you check that again, they might say, oh, I go at least 3 days a week. I make sure that I go out for a brisk walk, or I walk the dog, or I don't take the car and I take the kids to school. We walk to school, or any of those things that show that they're actually committing to a more regular physical activity. And then at the end of your project, you might measure again and find that, well, they commit to 5 days a week. Monday to Friday, they always make a point. They rest at weekends, but Monday to Friday, they always make a point of going out for a walk, 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk, or they've joined a walking group, or even started doing park run, or an example like that. So these are general measures to see how much physical activity and people do, and what level they do it at, whether it's moderate to more vigorous activity. Then here on this screen is an example of the questions that you might ask young people if your project is specifically targeting young people. And it gives examples that might be more appropriate to a young person, like PE at school, playing outside, team sports, swimming, dance or gymnastics, running or jumping, which might be more relevant to young people than it might be to those over the age of 18. And by all means, do use these as a template, a starting point, and tailor them to your specific project delivery. This section is in relation to just getting a sense of what people know about their health and well-being. There are 2 elements to this. The first one is this awareness of the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines for good levels of physical activity. So I wouldn't suggest that you need to do this as a start of your programme, but you might find that people's knowledge and understanding has grown as a result of taking part in your programme. So here's the sorts of things that the Chief Medical Officer would like to get a sense of. How many minutes of moderate physical activity per week do adults need for general health? So you might do this as asking people to complete this individually, or you could do it as a group exercise and ask people to put their hands up, if they think 60 minutes is the right answer, or 90 minutes, or 300 minutes, and count the number of people in the room, count the number of people who answer any one of those questions to get an average of understanding. You might want to do it in that format. That's perfectly acceptable. And these go through a series of 5 to 6 questions which are asking, what people understand about the physical activity levels should be. And then, at the end of that process, has this project helped you to increase your levels of physical activity? And how many sessions of activity or activities for the project have you participated in? So this is directly related to, one, their understanding of physical activity and what is good and bad physical activity or poor physical activity, and then two, what your project has given them in a sense of understanding and improvement in their levels of physical activity. Here's another way and another format when we're looking at mental health and well-being, and this is regarding loneliness and isolation. Um, and here are some very simplified questions. How often do you feel a lack of companionship? And then you'll see on the right hand column, it says hardly ever, never, some of the time. And then we go right down to the bottom. How often do you feel lonely? Often, always, some of the time, occasionally, hardly ever, or never. So these are, this is an example of a really simplified questionnaire that you can ask people and get them to circle the one that they think most suits them. The important thing with all of these, there is no right or wrong answer. They just answer how they're feeling at that particular time, and it's their own truth. So it's not being measured against anybody else. And hopefully by the end of the project, you might want to ask these questions again and see if that's changed. It may well have changed because they've got to know some of the participants in your project, become friendly, go for a coffee after the session that they've taken part in with you, and are starting to build those social connections and perhaps ring each other up and support one another or buddy each other and encourage each other to take part and carry on taking part. This is the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, and you can see this is a really simplified format. You know, I've been able to make up my own mind about things. I've been feeling optimistic about the future, and this is a case of just tick boxes where they can tick themselves on the scale. You might want to use this as a baseline start of the project question, and then check again at the end of the project because you might see some changes in how they feel about those answers. Here's one of the criteria is healthy eating as part of the health and wellbeing agenda, and you might want to measure if your project is specifically around food and healthy eating and improving diet and nutrition. You might use this as a baseline to find out what people's habits are around eating fruit and vegetables, consuming sugary drinks, and things like having fast food and takeaways. And then you might want to measure at the end. You might, as part of your project, be teaching people how to make what we call fakeaways rather than takeaways. And that is looking at specific fast food takeaway menus and finding healthier alternatives and ways of cooking them, and we call them fakeaways. So it's a good way of measuring that, you know, people don't have maybe takeaways anymore, but what they actually do is they kind of make pizzas out of really good and fresh ingredients, or they make their own curries that are filled with lots of vegetables and use far less salt and oils in them and things like that. So this is just one of the examples of healthy eating and how you can measure it. There's an Eat Well guide, and this I mentioned this was the second of the two ways of measuring general understanding and knowledge that people have, and this is called the Eat Well guide, and this is getting a sense of people's actual knowledge about eating more healthily. So, you know, what percentage of food you eat should be fruit and vegetables? Is it 10%, 33%, 50%, or genuinely people don't know? What is a healthier fat choice? Butter, lard, ghee, vegetable oil, or don't know. As you can see, it's just testing where people are at in their general knowledge about healthy eating. And you might want to, at the end of your project, because they've had such a wonderful experience of good, nutritious, and really tasty food that you've shown them how to prepare, and given them alternatives to use. You might want to use this again to see if their awareness of the Eat Well guide has changed significantly. This goes on to another criteria within uh, the Royal Borough of Greenwich funding for the Community Voting Day. And when I say criteria, you do not need to be doing something on all of these levels. You only need to look at examples that relate to the project that you are providing. So if it's about healthy eating, that's the questionnaire you focus on. If it's about physical activity, that's the questionnaire you develop for your project. But this is about use of green spaces and the green environment, and it's asking the question about, you know, whether people feel they're important spaces to use. For example, if it's young people, are they meeting up more socially using parks and green spaces as opposed to being on their phones or using social media to engage with friends? You know, how safe do they feel? Do they feel that those spaces are welcoming and safe, and encourage people from all different backgrounds? Um, and, you know, checking whether there are green spaces close to them and that they can easily access on a regular basis. I don't think I need to kind of go over that much more than to say this is just about taking people's response to those questions and seeing how they would use green spaces, um, either prior to your project or in the future as a result of taking part in your um, project that may centre around the use of green spaces. We touched on this earlier. This is about raising awareness or improving access to local support and services. And this is just checking where people are at in their understanding of what's available to them, and their knowledge that if they should have a health concern or they want to improve their health and well-being in any way, shape or form, that they know how to go about getting that information, that they know where there are services provided, such as health centres, advice centres, or through community groups or community organisations. And you can see the list of options that people could perhaps indicate that they get their information from word of mouth to going into local GP and speaking to health professionals. This is a indicator of people's levels of confidence in accessing those services. And what I mean by that is that people may very well know where services are, but feel intimidated by going to speak to health professionals and ask their opinion or ask about stuff, whether that's on an emotional level or a physical level, psychological level. They may not feel confident to have those conversations. And this is a way of indicating or getting a sense of where people are at. And you might see that there is a need for people to feel more confident in talking to health professionals. You might, as part of your project, commit to actually getting people to buddy up. You know, if people are lacking confidence, you know, buddy up with other people, go to appointments together and support one another and asking quick key questions, or even diminishing any sense of embarrassment about asking any personal health questions. So this is about not only knowing where their services are, but feeling confident to walk into those buildings, to those organisations or institutions, and get the information that they need to ensure that they keep on track with their health and well-being, that they seek medical advice at the earliest possible point, and that they don't leave things too late, which means that they might have to have more invasive procedures, that they actually might be able to get treatments much earlier and deal with symptoms fairly quickly. And then this is just really saying, as a result of taking part in your project, how do they feel? Do they feel more aware of what's around in terms of support services? It's asking the question, has your project helped them access local services? You might have actually signposted people to services, or you may have asked for particular professionals to come along and give a talk about various symptoms and signs and indications that will enable them to recognise some of the health checks that they need to do on a regular basis and where to go if they have any concerns. So, this is really showing the added value of them taking part in your project and what difference that has made. That's about it. It's a lot of information that I've imparted to you. Hopefully, that's been helpful, and it will give you an idea of the sorts of things that you need to look at the start, during the middle, and at the end of your project to show the impact that your project has had, to get a sense of where your project has made a difference. But it also serves another purpose. This may be your first project you've ever run. It may be one of a few projects you've run, or you might be testing out new ideas. Monitoring your project in this way and reporting that information to the Royal Borough of Greenwich will help you. It will help you, but it also help the Royal Borough of Greenwich in terms of how they target their health provision, what works, what's popular, how to expand and improve on what they're doing. But for your purposes, it provides two things. If you are encouraged by your project to go for further and larger sums of funding, you, by taking this information and collating this information, will have evidenced a track record, which is always a really positive thing to show a new funder, that you have a track record, a successful track record. You may have thought up a really good idea in your project and how you're going to deliver it and how you're going to target people and encourage them to take part. And part of the way through your project, you go, that's not worked as well as I would have liked it to. Taking note and reporting and monitoring on this helps you evaluate what worked well, what you need to tweak and change to continually improve and continually evaluate your progress. And you can only get stronger from doing this. So hopefully this is not just about taking down details for the purposes of the Royal Borough of Greenwich and reporting how your project is doing, but also in terms of your professional and delivery practice, and a form of improving that ongoing practice and getting better and better at it, and even realizing that some things were popular now, are popular now, but they're not popular in the coming years, and you might need to change and diversify what you do. You might also consider that you need to have different levels. So your project might be about physical activity, and some people might have limits on their flexibility. So you might need to look at different exercises or moderating exercises so that everyone can take part. So giving examples of, if you were doing a form of aerobics but you find some people get out of breath or can't stand for a length of time, adapting what you're doing so that some people can sit on a chair and still get that physical activity benefit. Anyway, I hope that this has been useful. There is some catch-up training that you can take part in. I recommend that you go on the Royal Borough of Greenwich Live Well site, where you'll find other examples of videos like this about developing your project idea, and also soon to come is support in actually making your application, so give you an indication of how to do that. and also how to prepare for your presentation. My name's been Gail Wallace. I look forward to seeing you on the community voting day, and please, on the slides you will see my contact details. If you need any further advice, support or information, feel free to give me a call. Thank you for listening.